You know, over 28, almost 30 years ago, Forrest and I began to eat wheat-free, sugar-free, dairy-free, way before it was any of the fads. And back then, when we got rid of white sugar, we moved towards maple syrup, honey, rice syrup, sucanat. We went to a lot of unusual sweeteners that were a little bit hard to find, and those worked for quite a few years. And then for me, about 14 years ago, something called menopause happened, and none of those sweeteners worked because anything that's got a high glycemic scale, even if it's natural, which also means it's a high carb, really impacts hot flashes. So that's when I went to Xylitol. It became my friend because it worked really, really well for me. But then when I went through the inflammation program when we first started it 3.5 years ago, that was a little bit of inflammatory, and so then I moved to some other sweeteners. I started using coconut sugar. I found that organic brown sugar worked. I was using these other sweeteners because they were low inflammatory, but they were really high carb. And so when my weight started to come back on, I found those are just too high carb, so I've got to find something else. Why am I giving you this background? Because sweeteners, we can't live with them sometimes, and we can't live without them. Because if we never have treats, we'll end up feeling deprived and we'll quit whatever we're doing. So part of the journey in the Inflammation Breakthrough Program, any journey that you take with me, is all about keeping it easy and discovering what works for you. So what I want to do today is share the sweeteners that seem to be working for me and for clients. And you now know that you can take range of motion and test yourself. You can see what happens. You can also use the food in dishes and then see what happens the next day. Because within a 24-hour period, your body will tell you if it likes it or if it doesn't. But these are my favorites. But remember, I'm always studying, always learning, and always sharing what I'm finding on the Facebook page, Cheryl Townsley. And you can get to it by facebook.com/lifestyle for health. But let's take a look at the current sweeteners. One of my favorites really is Fiber Yum, and it comes in a smaller container and this size. You can get it on Amazon, and it comes in a liquid or a powder. I tend not to use the powder very much, so I'm just using that up. I do really, really like the liquid. And where do I use it the most? Oh, those famous chocolate caramel chews. And that recipe is in the recipe guide that you have in Inflammation Breakthrough. I like to make them in these flexible little ice cube trays that I get on Amazon. There's 2 in a set, and it comes with a lid. And I usually make these with the base is cocoa, almond butter, melted butter, Fiber Yum, and a little bit of vanilla. And then the top layer is very similar. There's just no cocoa. And I freeze it with the chocolate layer and then with the caramel layer, and then I sprinkle sea salt or pink Himalayan salt on top. I just love these. And if you oil these, they just pop right out. So much easier than taking a knife and digging them out. They are much better if they stay frozen, so keep them in your freezer. When I travel with them, I just wrap them up with saran wrap, and then we're either staying at friends or we're staying at hotels that have refrigerator freezers always, so that I can take my chews. So that's a great little treat. Many others in the program. Fiber Yum is great. Now, some people like stevia, but over the last 3, 4, 5 years, as I've tested people, whether liquid or powder, I'm not talking about brands here, these tend to be inflammatory. I just find that well over half the people I've tested, it's probably closer to 75%, just don't do well on stevia. It tends to be inflammatory and it's got an aftertaste. So not one of my favorites. And although many people can do xylitol, this is one of the brands I like, Xyla, and they have their own website, and they often do sales, or at least they have in the past. But if you have pets like dogs, this is lethal for dogs. And some people, about a quarter of the population, have bowel reactions to this. So test it, see if it works for you, because it is inexpensive. Less expensive than Fiber Yum, but it doesn't work for the chews because you really need a liquid sweetener. Now, another one that I don't even have here because I never buy it, it's in a lot of the sugar-free candies. It's mannitol. And mannitol definitely has gut reactions in the form of diarrhea. Don't recommend it. The next one that I'm playing with and enjoying is monk fruit in the raw. You can get it both in this big package, you can get it in individual servings, or you can get it with a different brand that's in a liquid. This would be an alternative to stevia because 1 1/4 teaspoons is equivalent to 3/4 cup of sugar. So this works incredibly well for like a custard or some of the cheesecakes where you've got more of a custardy texture. Doesn't work so well when you're making cakes or cookies because you don't have the same amount of volume. Really have to play with those adjustments. Now, when you look at this, you're going to find that there's some maltodextrin. That's in there as a flow agent. So that doesn't bother me that it can come out and flow more easily instead of clumps. So it works for me, tests well. It's another option, and it's one that I like to use in a lot of different ways. Now the next two is a combination of erythritol, which is really what Swerve is. Erythritol is one of the grain alcohols, but it doesn't work the same way as xylitol or mannitol. And so when I'm doing baking, you know, cookies, cakes, cheesecakes, anything with a lot of bulk to it, I tend to use either erythritol or Swerve. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll throw in just a little bit of the monk fruit powder or liquid when I want just a smidge more sweetness, but I don't want to add a lot of volume. So these are the sweeteners that I've been playing with in the inflammation program in the new recipes, and I just wanted you to see them all in one place. Basically, they're all available online. You can find many of them in your local health food store. Play with them, find the ones that you like. If you think this is too expensive, get the small container. But oh my goodness, if you're going to enjoy the chews, this is my favorite. Now, if you find a way to get the great taste and use something different, be sure and let me know. Because as I told you, I'm always studying, always learning, and I'm always sharing with you what I've discovered. So sweeteners, yes, you can have treats, and yes, they can be low inflammatory, and they can be keto, low carb, high fats, absolutely delicious.